One, without a doubt, is I think the sort of individual attention that you give. I know in other programs, it's not so much the size of the program, but in terms of the relationship you have, the input that the MATs have in terms of uh, where they want to be placed, how the curriculum is going to look like for the summer, the connection between the person who is teaching the methods, observing them in the classroom, and then evaluating them more broadly in the program, and also supervising them and giving them advice about how to think outside of Brown. I think that that sort of connection is really, really comprehensive. I would almost use the word holistic. I think it's really a holistic approach that we give to individual students that I think is really unique and really special in terms of catering a certain type of training to specific needs and wants of the students in terms of where they see themselves teaching. The second aspect, I don't know how unique it is, but it's certainly new to me, and I'm very excited about it, is the notion of a teacher leader. And I think that that's critically important because I think that we focus a lot on being good teachers inside of the classroom, and it's extremely important to do that. So, and that's where much of my energies are focused. But ultimately, a teacher needs to engage in dialogue about their practice outside of the classroom, whether it be in the department, whether it be to a school board, whether it be to a district, whether it be to reformers. Teachers need a voice. I think that's fundamentally important. And so I think this notion of developing teacher leaders, one, provides a practical career set of assets in terms of teachers that want to go on to be department heads, assistant principals, do other sort of curriculum work or school work. But it also, I think, provides a much more important voice in terms of their identity as teachers, and to understand that they do immensely important work in the classroom, but society is always commenting on teaching, and that they need to be able to have a voice to engage those folks. And I think that the notion of being a teacher leader really sort of helps students articulate that voice. And so I think that's a nice feature of the program that I'm really excited about. I think first and foremost is the centrality of literacy for both teaching history and teaching for social justice. I'm a firm believer that many of our students in struggling schools, in schools that don't provide as many opportunities as other schools, in communities where those opportunities aren't apparent, are often denied the access to complicated and rich and informative text. And so I think that broadly speaking, that's fundamentally important, but history is largely encoded through text. And so to be able to access primary sources, to be able to access and interpret and critique historical interpretations is really a key vehicle in terms of engaging in the past, and ultimately, I believe, in terms of participating in American democracy. And so that, I think, the centrality of literacy and how do you do that in a way that you can engage all learners in complex activities around reading is key. I would say that's one of the backbones. The second, I think, would be what I call a combination of practical strategies informed by a theoretical rationale. And I think that there's a tendency in teacher ed or teacher training programs to emphasize one or the other. And I think that both are fundamentally important. And the reason being is that oftentimes I see best practices and strategies that aren't fully understood. And again, there is no one great book about how to do it. So a lot of it is learning these strategies and then being applied them to your specific material, your specific context, your specific kids, your specific lesson. And so I think in order to do that, you have to first be informed about what those best practices are, but then have sort of a more of a theoretical, deeper understanding of why those practices are in place. And that, I think, allows people to take ownership of them and ultimately make them best suited for their classroom. So I think, the underlying notion is, complements. And I think, there's two things really taken into consideration when you talk about individuals that complement. One is a certain aspect of similarities in terms of interest focus. And then another is differences in terms of styles and approach. And I think that, both it's sort of an art form and one that takes, getting a little bit to know your students. But really what I find is that there's often students that have a certain vision of a curriculum that they want to engage in terms of a certain approach, certain questions that they want to raise with students. And in that respect, I think it's very important to pair like-minded students. The secondary consideration then would be work styles, and that tends to just happen Sometimes naturally, but sometimes it's because people are different. And what I do find is that, there are folks that are really, really useful in teaching one another. And oftentimes what I find myself saying in debriefs is, student teacher A is over here and student teacher B is over here. And the goal is not for you guys to become the same, but it's to learn a little bit from each other's styles and move a little bit closer, because there are really interesting elements that everyone is sort of strong at. And there's no one right style, but as a teacher, you want to have a diverse repertoire. And I think that oftentimes the differences in teams really allow each other to learn from one another, the two different teachers. As far as the mentors go, I mean, that's a lot. That's been very easy for me because we're really blessed with wonderful mentors, and they also have different styles, but a broad range of strengths. And so I think that at this entry level of teaching, when you're beginning to teach, a veteran teacher who is good and knows how to communicate and articulate practice, which I think is often a skill that many veteran teachers don't have. How do you communicate what you know and what you see to novices? I think that because we have a team of 4 mentors this summer who are really talented in that aspect, it's just a notion of thinking a little bit in terms of background and style. But for the most part, I really feel that because we have a quality pool of mentors that I'm working with this summer, my first summer, that it's been really quite an easy pairing process. There is no great book on how to teach, right? If there was, I wouldn't have a job. And so really it's about different approaches, different philosophies, and different perspectives. And so one of the things that I engage and invite my mentors to do, and they often do it, is sort of share their thoughts, okay? And it's not always aligned 100% with mine, but it's usually a different perspective or an additional perspective. I think much of that is context driven, right? And different schools, there's different emphasis, there's different requirements, there's different expectations, and so much of what we teach about teaching is ultimately sort of how can you filter that through or make it fit into the specific context. And so what the mentors bring is a wealth of experience in different contexts, and they're able to provide, I think, a really grounded and thoughtful perspective to students. Then there's just the ridiculous usefulness of all the nuts and bolts that they have, all the lesson plans, all the resources, all the modeling that they can do. And so that is just a wealth of experience of concrete things that you can do, as well as sort of the more broad perspectives of way of looking at education issues. So it's just a great resource to have in the classroom, which is really interesting too. Not that they're just working with students, teachers in their classroom, but they're coming to the methods course and chiming in. It on one hand aligns what we're doing in methods into the classroom much more than I've seen in other instances, but it also really enriches the methods classroom because you have these experienced voices in the course.